Hi, this is Bill Silver. I'm the president of CannaCraft here in Northern California, and you are listening to Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh,
Roses are red, violets are blue, and when Oscar's not here, it's just me and you. Welcome, listeners, to the Professionally Cannabis podcast. And when I'm not having fun making whimsical introductions, I'm interviewing leaders from across the cannabis industry. So let's get to it. Today we have Bill Silver, president of CannaCraft. Now, you may have heard of CannaCraft as they had recently partnered with Heineken. Anyway, that's enough from me. Over to Bill.
where do they go, the smoke rings I blow?
It gives me great pleasure to introduce Bill Silver, president at CannaCraft. Specialising in new markets, Bill's looking to take CannaCraft's wheelhouse of cannabis products, which have proved a smash hit in California, to all corners of the world, regulations permitting. And there's just that little thing about their partnership with Heineken. So, not much going on at your end then, right, Bill?
You know, each day is another adventure in this industry. Thanks so much for the time to talk today.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. So, Bill, a question we do ask to literally every single one of our guests on Professionally Cannabis is, what led you to the plant?
Well, it's a plant that I've been familiar with a little bit throughout my life, but working in Northern California, people around the world know the area who are familiar with cannabis as the Emerald Triangle. It was part of the culture, part of the economy, really part of life up here for the 10 years that I've been living here. And as someone who was involved with the business community in my former role as dean of a university, I saw the industry starting to come out from the so-called shadows and become integral part of the business community. And I became more interested in what was happening as more and more people that I knew were becoming involved.
So, something you mentioned there really interested me. So, you've dovetailed from life in academia over to cannabis. What was the specific moment that made you take the leap?
Well, it was actually two separate decisions. The first was a personal one to step down from my role as dean of the School of Business and Economics at Sonoma State University. I'd been in that position for 10 years. And frankly, at the time, I was really thinking that I would go back to the classroom and teach. And so I had resigned my position. And it was the very next day that the founders of CannaCraft had come to start a conversation with me about working with them. I had known them for the past couple of months. I had been working with them just a little bit as a business advisor, and I was fascinated by the organization, by the industry, and most importantly, I'd come to know and really have great fondness for the people in the company, starting with the founders themselves.
For those folks who are listening that perhaps are less familiar with CannaCraft, could you give our listeners a sort of a whistle-stop overview about the organisation and the brands that sort of make up CannaCraft?
Yeah, most people may not actually be familiar with the company itself because the corporate entity is kind of behind the scenes. So if you're in the industry or have been for the past decade, you would know CannaCraft as California's largest manufacturer of cannabis extracts and now a variety of other products. But most people, consumers especially, would know us by our brands. Our most popular brand is called Care by Design, and it was the original CBD brand in the medical cannabis market here in California. And we were the first to market with ratio formulations, the combination of CBD and THC that people find with much efficacy for their ailments. And then we're also known for absolute extracts, which is one of the original concentrates in the market. And people have known our strain-specific vape pens for a number of years here. More recently, we've brought other brands to the market. Satori chocolate is a microdose chocolate edible. It's a fine confection. People really like that. And of course, we've received a lot of press for our partnership with Lagunitas and Heineken in California's best-selling sparkling beverage, which is our Hi-Fi hops.
And over the years, how would you say the consumer habits of those people interested in cannabis products have changed?
Well, I think what's happened is more consumers have come into the marketplace, and like any other brand or product category, the more consumers you have, the more varied the interests. And companies like us have responded by trying to create products that really are appropriate for the individual needs of the individual consumer, the customer of one phenomenon. But globally, I think what you've seen, the original users in the marketplace are those that were typically looking for a higher THC recreational experience. And now we see people that are looking for a very specific experience at a specific time. So for people that like to consume during the day, they're typically looking for something that's a little more uplifting, whether that's a focusing experience or a creative or social experience. And people still looking for that recreational experience will consume products that are a little more either sedative or intoxicating. So I think what you're having is more sophisticated consumers over time and newer consumers that are curious and frankly often overwhelmed.
And we both touched upon your partnership with Heineken and the Lagunitas beer. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came to pass?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story with many dimensions. Simply, it started with friends hanging out, and maybe that's kind of the classic start to many cannabis stories. But Lagunitas is a local craft brewery in the area where CannaCraft is located, and it turns out that some of the people that work at CannaCraft, in particular, one of our founders, Ned Bussell, and some of the people at Lagunitas, in particular, he's called the Brew Monster, but he's their master brewer, Jeremy Marshall. We're hanging out and talking about cannabis and beer and how hops and cannabis have such similarities, and looking at our extractors and wondering what would happen if we put hops through our CO2 extractors. And that was the start of a little bit of experimentation that led to our first release, which was a product called Super Critical. And it was a simultaneous release for Lagunitas and CannaCraft. Lagunitas took our cannabis terpenes and put it into their beer product. And we took their hop terpenes that we had run through our extractors and put it into a vape pen. And we released these at the same time under the same label, Super Critical. And it was really something we did on a lark. It was kind of fun, but it went viral in terms of the PR and publicity, and people were just fascinated about both products. And then a few weeks later, we ran into some regulation challenges. It was questioned whether the fact that you took cannabis terpenes and put them in an alcoholic product was that a violation of the regulations. And it was argued that since there was no what people call the intoxicating or psychoactive effects of THC in there, that we were within the regulations, but a strict interpretation of the regulations is such that no part of the cannabis plant can be used in making any alcoholic product. And so the supercritical beer was pulled from the market. We still have sold the vape cartridges throughout time, and having that project shut down, it led to this conversation about, well, what can we do next? And I know some people in the marketplace have gone to this idea of using dealcoholized beer and infusing that with THC. We think it's still questionable under the U.S. regulations. It's just not clear. But we took a different route. Jeremy had commented at the time that during American Prohibition, there was a beverage called a tonic or a hop tonic, and it was a sparkling water that was flavored with hops. And he said that he could brew one of those that would just be delicious. And Ned had commented, Ned, our founder, said, well, we can infuse that. And thus was born Hi-Fi Hops. And it's a sparkling beverage. It's never been a beer. It doesn't try to be a beer, but it sort of has some of the essence. So it has the flavor of IPA, And it has a little bit of the effervescence because it's carbonated, but it has no calories, it has no weight. And for many people who enjoy a craft beer, but these days a craft beer can be high alcohol, it can be high calories, it makes you feel very full, or the next day, if you want to go for a run, you drag a little bit. And this is just water infused with health elements, the health of THC or a THC CBD ratio. That's sort of the story of Hi-Fi Hops and how CannaCraft and Lagunitas started working together.
And something you touched upon, I find really interesting there. From your research and understanding of the market, do you see these two key activities that you'd imagine from cannabis and beer, so namely people getting high or drunk? Do you see these activities as mutually exclusive, or can you envisage a market which would combine these two, regulatory permitting?
Well, I'm going to redirect your question a little bit because I don't see that the two main activities are getting high or getting drunk as people would understand it or might interpret it. I actually see the main activity is people hanging out, just spending time with each other. It's that social experience. And then alcohol or cannabis becomes a facilitator maybe of that experience a little bit. So I do see them working together maybe in that process, but I do think it's not merely about getting high or getting drunk. It's about hanging out with friends and enhancing that experience.
If alcoholic beer is a social lubricant, what would you say cannabis beer is?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's a social accelerator in some ways, or an activator. With alcohol, you typically have a very unidimensional and specific reaction. That is what people understand as getting drunk, intoxicated, inebriated. And for many people, it's sort of a continuum of maybe loosening up a little bit, of releasing inhibitions rather, and then maybe levels of losing control to the point where it becomes debilitating in some way. Cannabis has very specific social experiences. So I was alluding to these earlier, but depending upon the strain in which you're consuming, your social experience may be one creativity, sharing ideas, brainstorming together, or it may be one of laughter and amusement, or it may be one of intense focus that you might have in a political debate, or it may be one of calmness, or maybe one of anxiety reduction. So there's all these specific reactions that individuals will have to the different strains.
Another thing that folks looking at the market may have seen is other big brands in the beverage space getting into cannabis. Molson Coors took a controlling stake in Hexo, whilst AB InBev lumped in hard with their investment into Tilray. What are the likes of these big beverage companies seeing in the market? And as an extension of that, how long until cannabis-derived products dominate their operations, if at all?
Well, that is the question that people are asking as they gaze into their crystal ball. I can't speak for those big beverage or big, you see it kind of in pharma or CPG or even ag as well. So those large companies that aren't traditionally cannabis companies that are getting into the space, not being in one of those companies right now, I don't know for sure what they're seeing, but what I would imagine is they're seeing future possibility of their market share being eroded by cannabis products, and or, said more positively, synergistic opportunities to enter a market that is a little different where they've been, but may have some things that are familiar. What do I think about those companies entering the space? Well, very few are actually in it right now. So for all the press that some of them have sought on their activities and investments, most don't yet have a product in the market. Through our partnerships with our network of companies that we're affiliated with and working with, we have a few dozen beverage products in the market right now. And what I could say about our experience is there's a lot of learning along the way. And I think you learn best with respect to consumers when you're meeting them in the marketplace, not trying to figure out what they want in some lab somewhere.
For cannabis brands, it's no secret that suitable packaging and labelling for products is key. Public safety has to be at the top priority for controlled substances. I recently read that CannaCraft's vape cartridges have been certified as child resistant under the requirements of the Poison Prevention Packaging Act. Now, how important is this, and how important is it that other cannabis brands follow suit?
Well, I think it's critically important that the industry as a whole, every player in the industry, takes their social responsibility at the highest level of importance. And certainly safety is a big part of that. In each state in the U.S. market, and as you look globally to each country, the regulations are directionally similar, but very specific and different, as it turns out, in almost every market. It would be nice to have national or global standards for what was required with respect to packaging, labeling, and child safety, but we're not there right now. We also have to consider the impact of any decision that's made with respect to regulations. So in the first round of the California regulations, the packaging was such that it really required a lot of plastic to meet the regulations. And perhaps we had erred on over caution in terms of providing safe packaging, while at the same time, the unintended consequences was, frankly, wrecking the environment with the amount of plastic that was required. So we would keep our kids safe for the next year, but we wouldn't hold much of a future for them in terms of the impact on the planet. Obviously, I'm being a little dramatic in the way I'm saying that, but it is the nature of these regulations that it's important to get industry input into understanding what it's actually like at the level of the producer to manufacture these products, so that what is done makes both public safety sense and economic sense.
And you mentioned about sort of overuse of plastics in packaging. How important are ESG considerations to CannaCraft when you're designing your packaging, when you're, looking at other parts of the organization?
Well, it's baked into our organizational values to run a sustainable business. And, here we talk about the triple bottom line of people, profits, and planet. And planet is critical, as is people, looking out for people. So it is important to us to constantly innovate our designs in such a way that it is environmentally friendly and meets the needs of the consumers. And I think there's a lot that we'll be able to do over time, and we've been a leader in the industry in doing that, and we look to others to follow suit in that regard.
Could you tell us a little bit about the senior management team behind CannaCraft and the folks that are really pushing the organization forward?
I had mentioned this earlier when you asked me about CannaCraft. I'd said how fond I was of the people that are at CannaCraft. And that starts with the senior management team, particularly our two founders. The company was founded by two individuals, Dennis Hunter and Ned Fussell, who are really icons in the industry. Dennis Hunter is from the Emerald Triangle and had become early in his career one of the largest cultivators in California. And at that time, he was operating in what was a quasi-legal market, and federales did not believe that what he was doing was within the limits of the law. And so he spent some time as their guest. He spent their time as a guest for something that today would be perfectly legal under the refined regulations. Ned grew up in New England, in Massachusetts, had moved out to California and got involved in the cultivation side of the industry, and also had become one of the larger cultivators in California. When Dennis had come out of prison, he couldn't go back into the cultivation side of the business, but knew so many people in the industry and had started up a growing supply company. And it was there that he had met Ned. Ned, to support the scale of his operations, was basically looking for a deal on the growing supplies, and had reached out to Dennis to see if they could work together. And that started the beginning of a partnership and friendship that continues to this day. And so from working together on the cultivation side to being very early on in the extract side to actually building some of the first and then the largest CO2 extractors and extraction capacity to now releasing many brands and literally hundreds of products into the marketplace. It was always the two of them at the helm of CannaCraft. But the company has grown and so has the opportunity. And, two founders can't do everything by themselves. And so they brought on a senior leadership team over the years from folks that share that same entrepreneurial spirit, but have experience in other industries. So in marketing, for instance, our head of marketing has just come over to us, Matt Sharkey from North Face, a very popular and familiar outdoor recreational brand. Our COO, Jim Horgan, had been in the consumer product space and medical product space and has scaled companies globally in those industries. Our sales leader, Matt Moray, had worked with Tony Robbins in terms of really refining the sales, sort of the Salesforce management, and then had spent some time in the cannabis industry before coming to work at CannaCraft. We've recently hired a chief people officer, Joel Miller, who had worked in the wine industry and also in the computer industry. So you'll see that CannaCraft is filled with people, many who have some experience with the plant, and many have come from other industries and are bringing their expertise to help us as we grow and scale.
One of the things that I loved when looking at your website is that you refer to the team as sort of our family. If someone was writing into Joel, your is it head of people? Was that the title?
Yeah, he's the chief people officer.
Yeah, so if someone was writing into Joel, your chief people officer, and was trying to get a job at CannaCraft, what do you think the key characteristics he'd be looking for would be?
Well, we call ourselves the fam, right? We are a family at CannaCraft. And, I think the characteristics that would make it a good fit for the organization is someone who is entrepreneurial, passionate about the plant and passionate about working with people and helping people, and also professionally very, very competent. I think one of the surprising things for people who aren't familiar with the industry and come into our facility and see what's happening, they're always surprised at how professional it is. Some may hold the stereotype of the sort of couch locked stoner and think that that's who's running the companies. And this would look more like a Silicon Valley tech group of people in terms of the camaraderie, the sort of intensity in working and problem solving. And you'll see a lot of smiles around the building. And that's not from people sitting around getting stoned high out of their mind, but people really enjoying their work, passionate about what they're doing, and excited about the challenges and the opportunities ahead.
Now, that's something that continues to strike me about the cannabis industry. Never before have I seen an industry where folks across the value chain are all working so hard, day and night, but all doing it with a smile on their face. And that's something that I think is really unique and amazing about this industry.
And I think it does stand in contrast to what in our area is often drawn as a parallel, and that is the tech industry. And I think that the difference is the smile on the face, because it's people working together. So often, if you think of the stereotypical tech company, and you've got a lot of software engineers doing a lot of coding, and that's a lot of time staring at a screen. Now, they'll take a break and they'll head over to the ping pong table or maybe celebrate with a few pints or a few puffs afterwards. And, there is that camaraderie, but the work itself is often isolating. I find the work in cannabis is often a social experience in terms of people working together to get the work done. And I think that's what makes it so enjoyable for people, is they're really forming true friendships and, like we refer to it, a true family of people that are working together.
One of the things I mentioned in my opening for you, Bill, was that a key focus area for you is new markets. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how CannaCraft are expanding across the globe?
Sure. CannaCraft is a Northern California company in terms of where our headquarters are, has always been focused primarily on the California market. And that was simply because the California market is the largest in the world. It's a couple $1 billion right now. And frankly, there's just enough work to do right here. So while we're watching people enter the industry and grab a couple licenses and then pretty soon a dozen licenses, and maybe they even have 15 or 20 licenses in terms of areas where they can operate, all told, those operations coming together don't even equal what we're doing here in California. And so we were content to focus on actually earning real revenues and making real products and getting them to real consumers in this very large market. But we've observed the sort of explosive growth and interest. And now here in the United States and, of course, around the world, too, you have markets opening up. And we realize that we would be left behind if we were only here in California. Add to that as a tourist destination, for years, we've had people coming to California, getting familiar with our brands, enjoying them, and then clamoring to have them in other places. And we always had to say, well, we just can't get there yet. So we made a concerted effort this year to move into other markets. And we're doing that through mergers. We're doing that through joint ventures. And we ourselves now are in a position where we can purchase new licenses and new facilities. And by the end of the year, we'll have CannaCraft products in another 6 states around the United States. And by next year, we hope to be in a number of different countries as well.
So, Bill, we have time for perhaps one more question. So let's go with a fun one, or at least I think it's a fun one. So something that I've seen is that CannaCraft actually offer tours at their facility. Now, I've heard from a few folks that people, when they're visiting, marijuana cultivation facilities, can get a little bit overexcited. What's the craziest thing you've heard about anyone doing at a CannaCraft tour facility?
Oh, well, I'm sorry. My answer might actually be a little more boring than you're looking for in the question. We do tour often, and it's been part of our ethic to be available for tours so we can educate people around the industry. And so, that's not only consumers or groups of people, but very specifically politicians, law enforcement, and others. But by California regulations, manufacturing site is a non-consumption site. And so you don't see people there doing anything out of the ordinary that they wouldn't be doing in any other facility that they had visited. Now, if we were to talk about some of the cannabis events that occur in around California and other places, well, I think it is there where you'll see some of the, let's just say, maybe a little crazier types of activity. I'm thinking about the Emerald Cup here, which is an iconic event in Northern California, and the person that's going around with a leaf blower that is blowing out volumes of cannabis smoke into the crowd. And there's probably a few other things that maybe it's not a good idea to talk about here on the
podcast. 100%. Well, awesome. Bill, thanks so much for joining us on Professionally Cannabis. You've been great.
Jonathan, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun to speak with you, and I hope in the future we have a chance to have another conversation. What's happening today is fascinating, and I don't expect it to change anytime real soon other than to get more interesting, more exciting, and more fascinating. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed that interview, and if you did, please feel free to leave a nice review, like, and pass the pod on to a friend or colleague.
That's it from us. Join us next week for another episode of Professionally Cannabis.
Love, please take me above, take me with you.